When billionaire Harrison Blackwell's family invited his black ex-wife to their charity gala, they planned the ultimate humiliation. But when Sophia walked in with two beautiful daughters with his eyes, the room went silent. What happened next would destroy everything they thought they knew about love, family, and revenge. Before we dive into this incredible story of karma and shocking revelations, hit that like button if you believe in second chances, and subscribe for more untold stories that will leave you speechless. You have to understand something about the Blackwell family. They didn't just have money, they had power. The kind of power that could make or break careers with a single phone call. The kind that could erase people from their world as if they never existed at all. Harrison Blackwell had built his tech empire from nothing. But somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten what nothing felt like. At 45, he was everything his mother Eleanor had molded him to be. Successful, influential, and engaged to Victoria Sterling, a woman whose bloodline was as pristine as her perfectly veneered smile. But 8 years ago, Harrison had been different. 8 years ago, he had fallen desperately, completely, recklessly in love with a woman who made him remember what it felt like to be human. Her name was Sophia Rivers, and she was everything the Blackwell family despised. She was real. I still remember the first time I saw them together. Sophia was finishing her residency at Chicago General, working 18-hour shifts and still managing to light up every room she entered. She had this laugh, this laugh, that could make you forget every worry you'd ever carried. Harrison would wait for her in the hospital cafeteria, sometimes for hours, just to steal 20 minutes of her time between surgeries. He looked at her the way most people look at miracles, like he couldn't quite believe she was real. They got married in secret, in a small chapel in Vermont, with nothing but wildflowers and promises between them. For 6 months, Harrison lived a double life, billionaire by day, hopelessly in love, husband by night. He was planning to tell his family, to bring Sophia into his world properly. But Eleanor Blackwell had other plans. You see, Eleanor had spent decades building the Blackwell reputation, and in her mind, Sophia was a threat to everything she'd worked for. A black woman from the south side of Chicago, raised by a single grandmother, putting herself through medical school. This wasn't the daughter-in-law she'd envisioned for her empire. So Eleanor did what powerful people do when they see something they don't like. She made it disappear. The phone calls stopped going through. The letters never arrived. And when Sophia finally managed to reach Harrison's office, she was told he was in Europe, indefinitely. What Sophia didn't know was that Eleanor had orchestrated every blocked communication, every returned letter. What she also didn't know was that Harrison was falling apart, believing the woman he loved had simply vanished without explanation. Then came the envelope, thick, expensive paper with the Blackwell family crest embossed in gold. Inside, divorce papers and a check for an amount that would cover Sophia's medical school debts 3 times over. The note was brief, cruel, and supposedly from Harrison himself. I realize now that what we had was a mistake. This should cover any inconvenience. But here's what nobody knew, what I'm telling you for the first time. Sophia was 3 months pregnant when that envelope arrived. 3 months pregnant with twins, and the father had just paid her to disappear from his life. She could have fought it. She could have shown up at his office, demanded to see him, forced the truth into the light. But Sophia Rivers was proud, and more than that, she was practical. She was about to become a single mother of 2, with massive student loans and no family money to fall back on. So she took the money, not out of greed, but out of love. Love for the children she was carrying and love for the man she was protecting from his family's poison. Now, 8 years later, Eleanor Blackwell was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. She was sending an invitation to the woman she thought she'd destroyed, planning one final humiliation at the annual Blackwell Foundation Charity Gala. She wanted to parade Sophia in front of society as an example of their foundation's work helping disadvantaged women who'd made poor choices. What Eleanor didn't know was that Sophia Rivers had built a beautiful life From the ashes of her broken heart, she'd become one of Chicago's most respected pediatric surgeons, known for her skill and her compassion. And those twins she'd carried alone through 9 months of heartbreak. They had grown into something extraordinary. Two little girls with their father's piercing green eyes and their mother's unbreakable spirit. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, and Sophia stared at it for a long time. Her daughters, Isabella and Gabrielle, were getting ready for school, their laughter filling the kitchen like music. They asked her why she looked sad, and she realized in that moment that she wasn't sad at all. She was ready to face the family that had tried to erase her, ready to show them exactly what their cruelty had cost them, and ready, finally, to let her daughters meet the father who had never even known they existed. Let me paint you a picture of Eleanor Blackwell in her element. Picture a woman who had turned manipulation into an art form, who could smile sweetly while sliding the knife between your ribs. She was 73 years old, but her spine was still steel, and her eyes still held the cold calculation that had built the Blackwell empire alongside her late husband. As she planned what she believed would be Sophia's public destruction, Eleanor felt something she hadn't experienced in years: pure, vindictive joy. The Blackwell Foundation Charity Gala was her masterpiece, held annually at the Four Seasons Ballroom, where Chicago's elite gathered to write checks and congratulate themselves on their generosity. This year's theme was second chances, and Eleanor had crafted the perfect irony. She'd arranged for Sophia to be seated at table 12, what the staff privately called the pity table, where they placed the scholarship recipients and charity cases who were invited more for show than for their checkbooks. Eleanor's plan was surgical in its cruelty. She would give her annual speech about the foundation's work, then call Sophia to the stage as a success story, a young woman who had made poor choices but had been given a second chance through their generosity. She would present Sophia with a small scholarship check, just enough to be humiliating, while 300 of Chicago's most powerful people watched and whispered about the black woman who had once tried to trap their golden boy. Meanwhile, Victoria Sterling was practically vibrating with excitement. Harrison's fiancé was everything Eleanor had ever wanted: blonde, blue-blooded, and utterly devoted to maintaining appearances. At 38, Victoria had never had to work for anything in her life, but she had mastered the art of looking sympathetic while discussing other people's misfortunes. She'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, imagining how gracious she would be when meeting Harrison's unfortunate past. But Harrison himself was a different story entirely. As the night approached, he found himself consumed by memories he'd tried to bury. He'd spent 8 years telling himself that Sophia had left him for money, that their love had been nothing more than an illusion. But late at night, when the business deals were done and the champagne had worn off, he still dreamed about her laugh. He still woke up sometimes, reaching for someone who wasn't there. The night of the gala arrived with all the pomp Eleanor had orchestrated. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over silk gowns and diamond necklaces, while waiters moved like ghosts between tables laden with orchids and champagne. Harrison stood at the front of the room in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, playing the part of the devoted son and loving fiancé. But his eyes kept drifting to the entrance. And then she walked in. Sophia Rivers entered that ballroom like she owned it, and in that moment, she might as well have. She wore a simple black dress that hugged her curves without being ostentatious, her natural hair styled in an elegant updo that showcased the graceful line of her neck. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of a woman who had faced life's worst and emerged stronger. But there was something else, something that made every conversation in that room pause for just a heartbeat. She wasn't alone. Behind her, holding her hands with the unself-conscious trust that only children possess, walked two little girls who looked like they'd stepped out of a fairy tale. Isabella and Gabrielle Rivers, 7 years old, and absolutely radiant, in matching navy dresses, their dark curls caught up in ribbons that sparkled under the chandelier light. They looked around the grand ballroom with wide-eyed wonder, whispering to each other in the way twins do, sharing secrets in a language only they understood. But it wasn't their beauty that stopped the room cold. It wasn't even their obvious intelligence, as they took in their surroundings with curious, analytical eyes that seemed far too mature for their young faces. It was something else entirely, something that hit you like a physical blow if you knew where to look. Their eyes, those devastating, unmistakable green eyes that had been passed down through generations of Blackwell men, the same eyes that had made Harrison's grandfather a legend in business, the same eyes that had helped Harrison himself see through every corporate lie and boardroom betrayal. Those eyes were now looking out from two little faces that belonged to children who should not, could not, exist. I watched Harrison's face as he caught sight of them across the room, and I saw the exact moment his world tilted off its axis. His champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the marble floor in a sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly quiet ballroom. Victoria followed his gaze, her perfectly glossed smile freezing as she tried to understand what had just stolen her fiancé's breath. Eleanor, still basking in her anticipated triumph, hadn't noticed yet. She was too busy accepting compliments on the evening's arrangements, too focused on the moment when she would call Sophia forward and complete her revenge. She had no idea that Karma had just walked through her doors wearing matching navy dresses and carrying the power to destroy everything she thought she'd built. What happened next will be burned into my memory forever, because I witnessed the exact moment when 8 years of carefully constructed lies crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. Harrison moved through that crowd like a man possessed, his usual composure completely shattered. He pushed past senators and socialites, ignoring their startled looks, his eyes locked on those two little faces that had just rewritten his entire understanding of his life. Sophia saw him coming. Of course she did. She had those same instincts that had helped her survive medical school, that had guided her through countless life or death surgeries. She straightened her shoulders and placed protective hands on her daughter's backs. But there was something else in her posture, a quiet readiness, as if she'd been preparing for this moment for 7 years. Isabella noticed him first. She looked up at this tall, handsome man in the expensive tuxedo who had stopped directly in front of their table, and with the fearless curiosity that only children possess, she tilted her head and studied his face. "Mommy," she said in that clear, caring voice that children use when they have no idea the entire room is listening. "This man has eyes like mine." The ballroom didn't just go quiet, it went dead. 300 conversations died mid-sentence. Crystal glasses paused halfway to lips. Even the string quartet in the corner seemed to miss a note. And in that silence, Gabrielle looked up too, and with the devastating innocence of a 7-year-old, added, "He looks like us, Bella, like when we look in the mirror together." Harrison dropped to his knees right there on the marble floor, not caring about his $1,000 tuxedo or the stares of Chicago's elite. He was eye level with his daughters now, these beautiful children who had inherited not just his eyes, but his stubborn chin, his expressive eyebrows, even the way they tilted their heads when they were thinking. "What are your names?" he whispered, and his voice cracked like he was 17 again, instead of 45. "I'm Isabella Rivers," she said proudly, "and this is my twin sister Gabrielle. We're 7 years old, and our mommy is the best doctor in the whole world." That's when Sophia spoke, her voice steady and clear, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Girls," she said, never taking her eyes off Harrison's face, "say hello to your father." The words hit the room like a bomb. I watched Eleanor's face go from confusion to horror to rage in the span of 3 seconds. Victoria's champagne glass shattered in her grip, blood from her palm dripping onto her white Chanel gown, but she didn't even seem to notice. And Harrison looked like he'd been struck by lightning. "My father?" Gabrielle asked, looking between her mother and this stranger with growing excitement. "Our real daddy? The one in the pictures you keep in your bedroom." And that's when the dam burst. Harrison reached out with trembling hands to touch Isabella's face, as if he needed to confirm she was real. "You kept pictures of me?" he whispered to Sophia, his voice broken. "Of course I did," Sophia replied, and for the first time that night, her composure cracked just a little. They deserved to know what their father looked like, even if they might never meet him. That's when Eleanor finally found her voice, pushing through the crowd with the fury of a woman watching her life's work collapse. "This is ridiculous," she declared, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Harrison, don't listen to this woman's lies. She's clearly coached these children." But she never finished that sentence, because Isabella, sweet 7-year-old Isabella, with her father's eyes and her mother's fierce spirit, looked up at this angry woman and said with perfect clarity, "Why are you yelling at our mommy? She told us our daddy lived in a castle with a mean queen who didn't want us to exist. Are you the mean queen?" The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that ballroom, except for the sound of Eleanor Blackwell's reputation crashing to the floor in pieces. Because here's the thing about children. They don't lie. They don't manipulate. They simply speak the truth as they understand it, and everyone in that room knew it. Harrison stood slowly, his eyes never leaving Sophia's face. "You tried to tell me," he said, "and it wasn't a question. You tried to tell me about them. Every day for 3 months," Sophia whispered back, "until your mother made it clear that we would never be welcome in your world. So I built them a different world, Harrison. A world where they were wanted and loved and celebrated every single day." And that's when Harrison Blackwell, billionaire tech mogul and Chicago's most eligible bachelor, did something no one in that room had ever seen him do. He started to cry. "I've seen powerful men fall before, but never like this. Never with such complete devastation and such raw vulnerability." Harrison's tears weren't quiet or dignified. They were the desperate sobs of a man who had just realized he'd lost 8 years with his children. 8 years of bedtime stories, and first steps, and scraped knees, and birthday candles. 8 years of being a father. But here's what broke my heart even more. Watching Isabella and Gabrielle process their father's pain with the pure compassion that only children possess. Isabella, the more outgoing of the twins, stepped forward and gently patted Harrison's arm. "Don't cry, Daddy," she whispered, and the word daddy hit that ballroom like a physical force. "Mommy says crying is okay when your heart hurts. Does your heart hurt?" And Gabrielle, always the thoughtful one, added with devastating innocence, "We can share our mommy with you. She has enough love for everybody. She told us so." That's when Victoria Sterling finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. She looked at Harrison, at this man she thought she knew, kneeling on the floor with his daughters, and she understood with painful clarity that she had been competing with a ghost all along. "Harrison," she said quietly, pulling off her engagement ring with steady hands. "They're beautiful. They're absolutely beautiful. And they're yours." She placed the ring on the table between them. "I hope you find your way back to each other." And just like that, Victoria Sterling walked out of that ballroom with more grace than most people show in their entire lives, leaving behind a man who had never truly been hers to begin with. But Eleanor wasn't done fighting. She stood there in her designer gown, watching her carefully constructed world collapse, and made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "This changes nothing," she announced to the room, her voice shrill with panic. "So what if there are children? They're illegitimate. They have no claim to the Blackwell name or fortune." That's when Harrison stood up, and the transformation was extraordinary. Gone was the dutiful son who had spent 45 years seeking his mother's approval. In his place stood a man who had just discovered what really mattered, a father who would burn down the world to protect his children. "Mother," he said, and his voice carried a quiet authority that silenced the entire room. "These are my daughters, Isabella Rivers Blackwell and Gabrielle Rivers Blackwell. They are my heirs, my legacy, and the most important thing that has ever happened to me. And if you cannot accept them, then you no longer have a son." The gasp that went through that crowd was audible. Eleanor's face went white, then red, then white again. She had played this game for 7 decades, but she had never encountered an opponent like the love of a father for his children. But the real moment of reckoning came from an unexpected source. Isabella, who had been quietly observing this adult drama, with the sharp intelligence she'd inherited from both her parents, walked over to Eleanor with the fearless confidence of a child who had been raised to believe she was worthy of love and respect. "Are you sorry?" she asked Eleanor directly, her small hand reaching out to touch the older woman's trembling fingers. "Mommy says when we hurt people, we should say we're sorry and try to do better. Did you hurt our mommy? Because she gets sad sometimes when she thinks we're not looking." And in that moment, faced with the pure, honest question of a 7-year-old child, Eleanor Blackwell finally understood the magnitude of what she had done. She had destroyed her son's happiness, stolen 8 years from her grandchildren, and broken apart a family out of nothing more than pride and prejudice. She looked into Isabella's eyes, those unmistakable Blackwell eyes, and for the first time in decades, Eleanor felt shame. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and the words seemed to cost her everything. "I'm so very sorry." As the evening wound down and the shocked guests began to filter out, no doubt rushing home to spread the most delicious scandal Chicago society had seen in years, Sophia finally allowed herself to hope. Harrison knelt between his daughters, asking them about their favorite books, their dreams, their fears, trying to absorb 7 years of their lives in a single conversation. "Can we go home with you, Daddy?" Gabrielle asked with sleepy innocence. "Mommy could come too. We have a really nice house, and Mommy makes the best pancakes." Harrison looked up at Sophia then, this woman who had sacrificed everything to protect his children, who had raised them with such love and strength that they could offer forgiveness to the father who had never even known they existed. "Sophia," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "I know I have no right to ask, but could you give me a chance? Could you give us a chance? I want to learn everything about them. I want to be the father they deserve. And if you'll let me, I want to love you the way I should have 8 years ago." Sophia looked at this man who had unknowingly broken her heart, then at her daughters who were already claiming him as their own, and she made the choice that had been 8 years in the making. "We can start slow," she said, and her smile could have powered the entire city. "But Harrison, if you want to be part of our lives, it has to be real. No more secrets, no more lies, and no more letting other people decide what our family looks like." And there, in that ballroom where Eleanor Blackwell had planned to destroy her, Sophia Rivers found herself being swept into the arms of the man she had never stopped loving, while their daughters, their perfect, impossible, miraculous daughters, clapped their hands and demanded to know if this meant they could finally have a daddy and mommy wedding, like in the fairy tales. Sometimes karma doesn't come with thunder and lightning. Sometimes it comes with tiny hands and innocent questions, and the unstoppable force of truth finally coming to light. And that's how the Blackwell family learned that love is stronger than pride, that children can heal wounds that seemed impossible to mend, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon against cruelty is simply the truth spoken from an innocent heart. 6 months later, I heard that Harrison sold the family mansion and moved into a beautiful home just 3 blocks from Sophia's place. He wanted to be close enough that Isabella and Gabrielle could run between houses whenever they wanted, but far enough away that Sophia could maintain her independence while they figured out their new normal. Eleanor, humbled by her grandchildren's forgiveness, spent her remaining years trying to make amends, becoming the grandmother she should have been from the beginning. What an incredible story of karma coming full circle. If this story touched your heart, smash that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear about the power of truth and second chances. Subscribe and ring that notification bell because you won't want to miss our next jaw-dropping story. What do you think? Did Sophia make the right choice, giving Harrison another chance? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, love always finds a way home.